This ceiling fan has been in this master bedroom for a while now. It's super expensive to buy them new. So for this one, I've decided to do a fan makeover and go from old to modern. Now this is something that you can easily do as well. I'm gonna show you how it's done on this episode of Keeping Home Up. I'm really happy with the way this fan turned out. I was a little nervous about the colors I had picked, if they'd work or not, but they did. So let me show you how I did it. First thing you need to do, of course, is turn off the main breaker before you take the fan down. Once that breaker's off, take the fan down piece by piece. So you take off each fan blade, then you take the main body down. Now I'm gonna pause just for a second here because I've gotta give you this tip. This is a real time saver. Be sure you take pictures of what you're taking apart so you can put it back together again later. This is going to save you a ton of time when it comes to putting everything back together. So I totally recommend doing this. You don't want to miss this step. Now that's something you'll want to do throughout the entire process. Once the fan was down, the first thing I did was take the brackets off of all of the blades. Now there's this little plastic piece that was kind of tough to get off. At first I found that I could just kind of squeeze it through the little hole with my finger, but that started to hurt after a while. So I got this little soldering tool that I have that has this flat end. It's almost like a flat end of a screwdriver to push out the rest of them. After I got all of the brackets off, it was time to sand the blades. So I just grabbed my sheet sander and started sanding with 120 grit sandpaper. And big thanks to my wife for getting these shots for me. She's a great videographer. One down, 4 to go. I forgot the other side. Katie also caught that little blunder. Yes, you need to sand both sides of the blade. I have to admit, it took a long time to sand all of these, so I don't recommend doing it by hand. I'd either use one of those circular sanders or a sander like this, which is a sheet sander. After I got the boards looking nice and smooth, I gathered them up and got ready for staining. To prep for staining, I put some plastic over my workbench to protect my workbench, and I put some gloves on to protect my hands. And I used a water-based Minwax stain, and there are 3 steps to this stain. This first step is the pre-stain, and what this does is it makes your final finish smooth and makes it so it's not blotchy. There are a few ways you can apply it. You can either apply it using a brush and brush over it, or you can do what I did and use a rag. And the reason I used a rag is just because it's only the pre-stain and I wanted to save my nice brush for the actual finish itself. You'll want to let the pre-stain sit on the wood for about 5 minutes, and after that 5 minutes you'll want to wipe off any pre-stain that may be sitting on the top of the blade. You don't want any of that stain sitting on top. After you wipe that off, let it sit for 15 minutes. And then lightly sand the blades with a real fine grit sandpaper like 220. The best way to sand it is to go with the grain and then wipe them down with either a tack cloth or a damp rag. And that's it. This whole pre-stain process only takes about a half an hour because you only have to let it dry 15 minutes before you sand it. Now you're ready for the top coat. Again, I'm using a Minwax water-based product, and this color is classic gray, in case you're wondering. Now here's a little tip for the brush. You don't need to dip it in the stain real far. Just dip it in just enough to cover that tip, wipe it off, and then brush the stain on and brush it on in the direction of the grain. And then once it sits for a few minutes, you want to wipe off all the extra stain that may be on top. And then this is where it makes it transparent. So the more you wipe off, the more transparent it's going to be. Also, anytime you're using a rag with stains, you'll want to make sure it's a lint-free rag. Let that stain dry about 2 to 3 hours before you put a clear coat on it. Now, here's a tip. When you put the can on the stain, put a rag over the top of the can so it doesn't squirt all over you when you close it. Okay, the ceiling fan blades have been stained on both sides. Now, the next step is to put this polyacrylic on it. What's nice about the polyacrylic is it's water-based, and water-based dries pretty quickly. That way I can just brush it on, and I'll probably come back in 2 to 3 hours, kind of check it out and see if it's ready for a second coat. Now the coats you put on it are kind of light. You don't want to do it real heavy. So we'll put a couple of light coats of this polyacrylic on it and we'll be good to go. Now when you mix up stain, you can shake it. But the polyacrylic, you don't want to shake it, you just want to stir it, because if you shake it, it'll bubble. So stir it and keep it stirred constantly, and then in between coats, you can put your brush in a plastic bag like this with a rubber band, and you don't have to wash it. After about 2 hours, you'll want to sand it. It's actually best to sand with the grain, not what I'm doing here. Sometimes I forget, and I just do it like this. Just sand with the grain, and then wipe it down with either a tack cloth or a damp rag. Then you just repeat. You put a second or third coat on, and you do that until you're happy with what you've got. I put 2 coats on mine. Those blades take a long time to dry, so while they dried, I pulled out the light kit. I didn't want to use the old lights that were on this fan, so I bought a new LED light kit to put on the fan. It was a universal light kit that will work on most fans. I bought this one at Lowe's. I'll put a link in the description of the exact one that I bought. I'm painting it so it will look like the rest of the fan. And I also took apart all the pieces on the main body and I sanded each piece. Now sanding it is important because it gives the paint something to adhere to, so don't skip this step. And of course, once you sand it, you'll want to wipe it down with a damp rag to get all of the dust off of it. I painted it with a Rust-Oleum metallic paint and primer all in one. It was a flat, soft iron, really pretty color. And it's best to do several light coats rather than one heavy coat because you don't want it to drip. If you do one heavy coat, you may find drips on it and things like that. And then once the paint dries, I let the last coat dry at least overnight. In between coats, you can do a couple hours in between coats, but that last coat, let it dry overnight and then put the main piece back together again. Now remember earlier in the video when I mentioned you'll want to document everything? Well, hopefully you documented taking that body apart. You'll need that when you put it back together. Now I'm not going to show exactly how this one was put together because everybody's fan is different, so you'll just want to make sure to document that. Now we're on the home stretch. We're going to put all the brackets back on the fan blades, and then we're going to install the fan back into the ceiling. Here's a little trick I use when I'm installing it myself. I use 2 ladders. One ladder has the fan on top, and there's a blanket over that ladder to kind of protect the fan, and then the second ladder is the one that I'll be on as I install it. So first thing you'll do is turn the power off at the breaker and then install the electrical. And before I do this, I refer to the pictures I took earlier to make sure I get all the wires hooked up correctly. Next I install the canopy. I actually have to lift up the fan to do this, but on one of the sides right here there are hooks that kind of hold it up, and so you don't have to hold it the whole time. You just put it on those hooks and then you screw it in. And then you just put the other screw in the other side, and then you make sure they're both tight after that, and you're good to go for the canopy. After the canopy, I put the blades in. The blades are really easy. There's just 2 screws per blade. And once you have all the blades up, the next thing is the lighting kit. There was some prep work that had to go into the lighting kit. Now this is the top of the light in the lighting kit, and what I had to do was put the white and black wires into this box here. This box was already on the old light, and that box will just screw onto the light kit. Next I had to snip the black and white wires that were on the light kit. I stripped the ends of the wires and then I connected them to that box. I just used regular twist-on wire connectors, and I did the black first, and the black went to a black and white striped wire, and then the white one went to just a regular white wire. And that's how I set up the lighting kit. Now it's ready to be installed on the fan, and then you do that with just 3 screws on the side. So it's super simple after that. You put the light bulb in, and then after the light bulb, the globe goes in, and that just kind of twists in. I kind of kept the bag on it so I wouldn't get a lot of fingerprints on the globe. And then kind of as a final touch, I ordered these pretty cool fan and light chains. They actually have a black chain attached to them, so they look really nice. And I ordered them on Amazon for under 10 bucks. So that's a pretty cheap way to put a nice finishing touch on the fan. And that's it, an old fan turned into a modern fan. I'm just gonna let the music play here and give you some before and after pictures.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
And take a look at these fan blades. They're pretty neat. You can see through them, you can see the grain, and it's just really nice. I was so happy with the way that it turned out. Thank you for watching this tutorial. Please consider subscribing to my channel, and if you hit the notification bell, you'll be one of the first to find out when I release other tutorials.